This is my zine that I've been working on for about the past month or so, and in today's video I would like to share my experience and the process behind making it for anyone that might be interested or might be thinking about doing the same thing. Just to give a bit of an introduction to the zine, all of the photos in it were taken at the Nottingham Goose Fair that happens every year in October. I just thought it could make for an interesting project, and so I spent 7 out of the 10 days that the fair was on taking photos at different times of the day, and I think at the end I ended up with something like 800 photos. My aim was to capture the event in a way that it would give a coherent overview of the overall vibe and atmosphere, and I didn't really focus on just like one specific thing. I just took photos of everything and anyone. If I had to pick out one main challenge that I faced while shooting, it would probably have to be the endless crowds everywhere. Sometimes it was just really difficult to find a good composition in all of the chaos. Once I had all of the photos, it was time to design the zine. I wanted to keep it quite clean, yet playful, and so I went quite simple on the design, letting the photos speak for themselves. I decided to go with an A5 landscape format, and mainly just because majority of the photos in this, majority of the photos that I took were landscape oriented, and so it just made the most sense for me to go landscape and A5 size, because I think A4 was just too big for me, and A5 just seemed like the best option, and it was also the cheapest, so it was a no-brainer really. I designed the whole thing in Adobe InDesign, which I didn't have a ton of experience with, but I figured out the basics pretty quickly. Shout out to, I can't quite remember the name of the channel now, but I'll put a link in the description. Thank you for a very comprehensive tutorial. Couldn't do it without you. The first thing that I had to figure out in terms of the layout was sequencing, which basically means figuring out which photos come first and what's the order of them. I think it proved a bit more difficult than I expected, just because you just have to be able to tell a story through images, or at least that's the ideal objective. And what I found out, that although you might have a really good photo that you think fits the brief really well, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has a place in your story. So as much as it hurt, I kind of just had to eliminate a couple of photos that when I initially took them, I thought that they were bangers. But then later on, during the sequencing, I just kind of had to accept that they didn't have a place in the scene. If I could give one advice in terms of sequencing, it would probably have to be make sure that every photo has its purpose in the story. I would often just find myself just putting photos in just for the sake of it and just to like fill the space. Another thing I had to consider when making the zine was pairing. And so I had to make sure that all of the images on the same page spread are working together. They complement each other and they don't clash. Yeah, you don't want your photos to clash. That would just ruin the whole thing. When working on pairing, you can experiment with a couple of different layout techniques. For example, you can just leave a page blank if that works in your story. or you can do a full bleed. You can do a 1 photo full bleed spread. There's just a ton of options really, and you've got to figure out what works the best. I left my cover page till last just because I couldn't decide for the longest time what to go with. The design that I originally thought I was going to go with was a lot different from this, but in the end I decided to go with a full-size photo with some text at the bottom. For the title itself, I kept it quite vague to not give too much away, but at the same time have a bit of a connection to the topic, and I quite like how it kind of just blends into it, and it's not too distracting. So I think I'm considering I'm definitely not a designer of any sort. I'm actually quite happy how it came out, and I think it's quite visually pleasing. I highly recommend make your own zine, and it doesn't matter where you are in your photography journey, whether you just started or you're a seasoned veteran. I think it's just such a great way to look at your photography, and holding a finished piece of work in your hands is just one of the most rewarding feelings ever. At first I thought my work wasn't good enough to be made into a zine, but then who cares? What's the worst thing that can happen? No one's going to care, and as long as I'm happy with the result, that's the only thing that matters really. And so just to sum this up, go make your own zine, go take photos, be creative, and I'll see you next time.
Love sick like a dog with canine sensitivity, developing this new theory of relativity, connecting a soul's resting in captivity.